This is the Alden Report.
All right. Well, my name is Mike Alden. I usually say we are here in Blue Vase Studios, but this is the second time in 7 years of doing this just because of life circumstances and things we all got going on and busy lives and everything. I'm actually doing this podcast from my vehicle, and it's pretty awesome. If you don't follow me on Instagram, you should just check it out. A lot of people, they kind of hold themselves back. Oh, I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't have all the equipment. Well, look, I'm here to tell you right now that if you want to do a podcast, you can pretty much do it anywhere. And not only that, but my next guest is a former US ambassador. She's an author. She helps companies all over the world turn around. In fact, that's the title of her book. And I'm super excited to have her and to learn from her experiences in working with some of the biggest companies in the world. Her approaches are somewhat different than than what most people would think about when you're thinking about turning a business around. And she's done it for some of the biggest companies in the world. I'm super happy to make this happen. Please help me welcome Lisa Gable. Lisa, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for having me when you're driving around.
I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I think I told you, she just had an appendectomy, and then she's got soccer, and I got a couple other businesses, and I'm just here in New England. So, you know what, though, and then I'm like, man, like you're like big time. So I was like, man, will she be okay if I just did audio only in my car? And you're like, yeah, sure, cool, no, let's do it. So thanks for making it happen.
Well, no problem. I'm always happy. As I think I was telling you when we were prepping, I have like 3 microphones on my desk. I have lots of different cameras, backup systems the same way as you do in case I have to be mobile. But that's the world we live in today, right? You got to pivot. You got to be flexible.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I'm actually doing this from the Wi-Fi on my. So I have the Wi-Fi from my phone and the Wi-Fi from my iPad as the backup to connecting to my laptop, right? So, so it's crazy. So, listen, so you have this book coming out, depending on people listening to this, it might have just come out. It's called The Turnaround. And, we met through a mutual friend, and the podcast, the Alden Report, it's mostly entrepreneurs. It's people that, want to kind of get into that world. They're business people, and someone who's had a business myself and seen peaks and valleys and had a few turnarounds myself. Was really excited to kind of talk to you about the things that you've been doing, for other companies, all over the world. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you got into this world of helping companies, survive, especially during what's going on right now.
Well, I was honored to work at the White House in the Defense Department under Ronald Reagan, and was doing so, in fact, at the White House when Gorbachev came to visit. And there was no bigger turnaround or inflection point in, I believe, global recent history than that of the fall of the wall. And I was recruited into Silicon Valley to work for Craig Barrett. He was the senior vice president of Intel, had just revised the way Intel was doing its manufacturing because it was under severe competition from the Japanese. And as we know, the company is going through severe competition once again and semiconductor shortages. But what Craig taught me are the manufacturing processes and using those processes to turn around any situation. I was Craig's troubleshooter, so I was working on different projects that ranged from branding, actually getting a new brand off the ground, what ended up being the Intel Inside program, understanding what Intel had done wrong in the past as it related to the loss of its x86 trademark. And that started my path forward. And so I've been able, through working in government for 4 different presidents and working with 2 governors, to high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, food and beverage companies, the auto industry, and now actually running a not-for-profit that is a research NGO focused on food allergies. How do you take those principles? How do you apply them to breaking down what's going on in your organization and understanding what are the steps you need to take to start moving forward?
So when should someone, let's just go from the CEO level. When should the CEO start to be concerned and start to think about, man, we got to do something to turn this business around? Are there key indicators that things aren't going the way they should?
There are key indicators, but you have to be very aware as to what they are, because I talk a lot about the underlying cause of what's causing your problem. And so some of the indicators are surface things, and we think, oh, that's the thing that's wrong. Maybe you've seen a recent departure of employees. Maybe it's that you're losing sales. Perhaps the cost structure of the primary initiative that you're engaged with is costing a heck of a lot more than it should be. And so your margins are really thin. You're always going to have red flags. The critical thing is, at some stage, you need to stop tweaking what you're doing and dig in deep in understanding what is the underlying cause of what's going wrong in my organization. And it can be multiple different things. It may be that actually the cost structure you set up initially isn't sustainable, because costs should come down and outputs should increase. And if you don't have that basic manufacturing principle of bringing your costs down on an annual basis and increasing your deliverables, that means that the structure you put into place wasn't quite right. Or you might have a personnel problem that's really resulting in the loss of a lot of your employees. I remember one company that I was working with lost a number of employees in the middle ranks. The reason why, and it all happened in 1 year. And the reason why is that none of them saw an opportunity for promotion. The company was kind of topping people out. And so as opposed to bringing people up, teaching them the knowledge they needed, giving them an opportunity to move forward, they were being smushed. And so as a result, they were looking for new things that they could do. Everybody wants to do better. And so you have to understand, what is it that's going on? What's the underlying cause that's really driving the factors that you are seeing as causing the disconnect and not allowing you to be as profitable or as successful as you want to be?
As I think about just the rapid advancement of technology, and having kind of that background with Intel, and I see just the shift in how we consume our media, and it's happening so fast. It brings me to, there's a great documentary called All Things Shall Pass about Tower Records, and then we hear about things like how Blockbuster could have purchased Netflix and they didn't, and how Pepsi was on the brink, and Coca-Cola could have bought them. Talk a little bit about technology and the shift in technology, and kind of how that is really having a negative impact on a lot of businesses, but also even a positive impact on other businesses as well. And the reason why I bring it up is it's somewhat selfish, because my business, my primary business has been advertising on television, and that world is changing. It's not completely dead, but that rectangular box on the wall that continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger is less of what we used to use it for, and more of again, a smart TV.
Right. I mean, one of the things you're talking about is when people confuse their tools and think that they're strategies. The reality is we have dizzying innovation cycles. And not only do we have dizzying innovation cycles going on right now and hyper competition, but at the same time, we are emerging from a global pandemic. And as someone who worked at the Pentagon and in the national security arena as an ambassador, we're facing a lot of issues on the international front. So the bottom line is things are going to start fluctuating, which means that the things you are very, very good at is where you need to focus your attention. People get spread too thin. And one thing I did learn at Intel, and I talk about in the book, is we used to talk about job one. And in my own organization, I always bring everybody back to what's job one, what's job two, what's job three? What three things do we need to perform on in the most optimal way and get rid of everything else? There are a lot of distractions. When you have innovation moving at the pace that it's occurring, we can get wed to one solution. And all of a sudden, we're out of match with where the rest of the world is going. And so you have to stay nimble, you have to stay flexible, but you have to stay hyper focused on job one. What is the one thing you cannot fail at doing? What is the one opportunity for you to gain the most market share? Why does your organization exist? And then do a constant reevaluation. Within the organization I'm running today, which is a research organization, every quarter I look back at the 5-year plan and I say, are we on it? Are we operating against it? Have we diverted off of it to such a degree that we're losing our focus? Do we need to go back to why this organization was started? And so grounding yourself in the why you were started in the first place and where your greatest opportunities are going to make you able to deal with the pivots and yet stay on course.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Right on your website, which is turnaroundbook.com. Again, that's turnaroundbook.com. The second sentence, you say, visualize the future, don't fix what's there and start from scratch. That kind of scares people. It scares me a little bit. Don't fix what's there, start from scratch. And you talked a little bit earlier about tweaking things as well. Talk a little bit about that because, again, my business, again, in particular, it's changing, it's evolving. What does that really mean? Don't fix what's there and start from scratch.
What it means, and I don't mean it literally, although I did have one
organization. You're scaring me, Lisa. You're scaring me.
I had one organization that essentially we did have to burn it down to the ground and rebuild it from the ground level up, but that's not the norm. What I'm really talking about is visualize if you were starting this organization today and you wanted it to achieve a particular future state. How would you do it? Go through the mental process of decluttering your mind and saying, this is what I want my perfect future to look like. What are the steps if I were building this today and I were entering into the marketplace with the technologies that are available here and right now? What steps would I take to get to that point? And when you go through that mental evaluation, what you will recognize is that you have cluttered things up. You have a lot of distractions. You're not following the straight path. You're actually making too many compromises. And it's making those compromises. And all of a sudden, you're looking at what you've built. And you think about what your intention had been, but because a certain situation happened in business, all of a sudden you made this little compromise over here, and you made another compromise over there. And I tell people that when I walk into a company that's struggling or an organization that's struggling, I've done this in business, government, and philanthropy, is sometimes I feel like I'm looking at a house that maybe it started as one form of architecture, and then they added on a porch, and then they added a driveway, and all of a sudden they put this garage in, and then they added a guest house. And that's what you have to do from a mental perspective. Visualize what is the perfect scenario? What do you want to see at the end game? What is the number one thing that you want to see being accomplished? And then you backtrack, you break down the present, and you audit what it is that you are doing. You decide to get rid of some things, you keep some things, you invest in other things, and then you create a path between your present to your future. And you use decision trees. And anybody who's been in technology, we all use decision trees, but I love them. I really do. I'll tell you, I have one from 25 years ago from Bank of America that was just like the best decision tree. I can't begin to tell you how many times we're whipping that thing out and saying, okay, what did they do at that point in time, which was a crucial inflection point for them as they were going through massive mergers and acquisitions? What are the steps you need to take? What are your yes, no points? It really comes back to basic manufacturing techniques like quality improvement processes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In a second, I want to talk to you about, your thoughts on partnering and how that can kind of speed up, a business in the direction that they want to move in just a second. Again, folks, we've been on with Lisa Gable. A lot of times I say I'm, here in Blue Vase Studios, but I'm actually here in my vehicle speaking with Lisa. She is an expert within the world of business and turning business around. She has her latest book coming out called Turnaround. Listen, if you're in business now, if you're thinking about starting a business, this is the type of book that you definitely want to have, kind of as a part of your toolkit, so to speak, because I think there's a lot of times as someone who's a business owner himself, sometimes we can't really see, really what's going on. Sometimes we're blinded by our own kind of visions. But this book right here will really kind of help crystallize what you need to do and how to do it. Not only, and this isn't just theory. This is real life experience with someone who's a former US ambassador, someone who consults with some of the biggest companies in the world and worked in both government as well as the private sector. So if you'd like some more information about Lisa, you can just go to turnaroundbook.com. It's really simple, turnaroundbook.com. You just Google her, you find all of her stuff as well. But her book, I believe, is going to change the trajectory of many businesses and probably mine as well. So go to turnaroundbook.com. So partnering, right? My most of my businesses, it's me. I own the business, and there is no partner. But I'd say over the past couple of years, I've kind of I've started to do that a little bit, partnering with people that have better skill sets than me, or maybe have a better network than me. But it's kind of hard, I think, sometimes for someone who has, I wouldn't call myself a control freak, but I'm definitely a type A personality. That's, I'm the CEO. I'm the one that makes the decisions. Talk about partnering and why it's important in this day and age and how it can actually accelerate one's business growth.
Sure. Well, I talk a lot about partnering and a lot about teamwork, and that is a fundamental thing that I have leaned into in every situation. And here's why. I focus on the fact that you really have 1 to 3 things that you can do well. You can't be all things to all people, and yet there may be certain objectives that you need to accomplish. And so what you can do is you can align your spending. I'm not suggesting you mix up the money, because that actually has its own problems attached to it, but you find partners where you align your strategic plans, you align your spending, you create an environment where all of you are going to be far more successful if you endeavor to share certain objectives and milestones along the way. Another piece that I talk a great deal about, especially in the space I'm in now, which is in medical research, is pre-competitive investment. What we're discovering is that data sets in particular have a lot of applicability across a lot of diseases. We're all collecting this data. It's very expensive when every single disease organization is building its own data set. It's expensive when pharmaceutical companies have to go out and try to identify diverse patient populations to participate in clinical trials. There's certain pre-competitive activities, and we saw this in Operation Warp Speed, where if you invest in common goals, what you do is all of a sudden you're leaping off from a much higher level of competition, as opposed to everybody spending their money just to get to the floor that you need to in order to really have that trajectory and launch off. So find your partners, align your spending. If they're even competitors of yours, and like I said, I've done this in pharmaceutical and biotech as well as in the food and beverage industry, figure out what pre-competitive investments you can make together so that everybody is leaping off from a stronger position of competition.
Yeah, it's really, really sound advice. And, as a lawyer, when I think of the word partner, I think of it, I kind of go down that legal meaning of the word partner, but I think you're talking also in a way, in a broader sense, as well as kind of maybe even encompassing a joint venture type scenario, right?
Well, a joint venture, or in some cases, it is literally just an alignment of interest. In fact, what I tell people is when you start down the legal path, and sometimes you start putting money in the same pot, that's where things can actually fall apart. There are a number of things that you can do through different infrastructures where you can invest in something pre-competitively. So again, we're going to use pharmaceuticals as an example. By utilizing my organization, which is a 501c3, a not-for-profit research institute, and putting the money in our area, having us all agree upon what are the objectives for the spending of that money, what milestones do we have, and what technological accomplishments do we need to have in place in order for everyone to then be able to compete at a higher level of performance. That's when you're a bit more successful. There can be formalities for doing this. The semiconductor industry, when I first got going in high tech, had lost market share to the Japanese. So the industry came together and actually made pre-competitive investments so that the US industry could compete at a much higher level, and really, as opposed to basically spending all of their dollars on exactly the same thing. You have to be smart about it. And I think number one thing when I talk about partnerships in the non-for-profits, you can partner with people who just have similar interests to yours. There might be things that they're doing in food insecurity when you're in a different area of health and wellness. But if you align your resources, if you work towards common goals, you both will have a far more successful time of accelerating the impact of the dollars that you are investing. So you can take it in a loose framework, or you can take it as you were talking about in an actual legal investment. But you want to find people who work like you do. If you're a highly process-oriented organization, you're going to be better off finding other people who are highly process-oriented. If you have to partner with somebody because they're super nimble and on the cutting edge, just make sure that you define very clearly the 1 or 2 things you're going to partner on, and then you are aligned on very specific objectives, but you're not distracted or drawn down by the other organization's inability to execute in other aspects of their business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think too about the breakup, right? A lot of people who get involved in a quote partnership, they don't really necessarily understand maybe the culture of each other's organizations. They don't really necessarily know each other. And I like what you're saying as far as, clearly defining, kind of what you're getting involved in. What do you say to people who are nervous? And I hear this a lot. They say, I hear this all the time. I have inventors that come to me all the time, right? And they say, "Well, I have this invention, right?" And then they want us to sell it, but yet they don't want to tell us what it is because they're afraid. And they say, "Oh, we give them an NDA," and everybody gets all nervous. Like, how do you overcome, kind of the nervous Nellies out there that have a business but they want it to grow and they know they can't do it on their own? Like, what are some things that they can do? Is it really just trust?
Well, trust, and you're the lawyer. There are a lot of rules involved in that process and legal agreements that you need to make, and you need to be very, very smart about it. But also think about non-obvious partners to achieve your objective. As you know, in my background, I've run three non-governmental and not-for-profit entities that partnered with businesses to help those businesses achieve very specific ROI business-related objectives. I did that in Japan, where I ran a non-governmental organization that was affiliated with Toyota and all of the Toyota supply chain. They needed me as an institution that could do things they couldn't do, but I understood what objectives they were trying to reach. Currently, I'm in the biotech pharma space, but before, my biggest partnership is I ran a not-for-profit called the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, where 16 food and beverage companies made a commitment to reduce calories in the marketplace. And we basically facilitated the proof point that they had done what they said they would do as a self-regulatory initiative. They were all trying to avoid a tax structure. You all may have heard about the sugar taxes that were being implemented across the United States and worldwide. They all wanted to avoid that. So they went to the government together and they said, "Look, we will make these changes. It will achieve the objectives that you want. And we're going to use this outside entity to basically do all of the accounting to report back to you with independent outside evaluators, whether we said we'd do what we said we would do. And secondarily, is we're going to work with public health and medical doctors who are going to evaluate the impact of our actions within the communities that have the highest rates of obesity." So think about non-obvious opportunities. I think today in climate, sustainability, waste, there are so many partnerships that are out there. So if you're an entrepreneur and you have something really nifty that's going to solve some big problem, maybe your partnership isn't with somebody that you're afraid is going to steal your IP and run off and build out their own business. Maybe your partnership is a non-obvious one where you find other people who share an interest in an end result, and you get there in a very unusual way. We're seeing that particularly in the climate area, and it's very exciting.
I hear non-obvious, and I think of our mutual friend Rohit. I'm like, wait, is this coming from Rohit? And he wrote a book called Non-Obvious. So I hear non-obvious. So we're on with Lisa Gable. She is the author of Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South. Check her out. See what she's doing. Her book is really innovative. I've checked out a lot of books. I've read a lot of business books, but I really like her perspective, and I also really love her experience. She's been doing this for a long time. There's a lot of books that are business books that have been written that, they've been in business a couple of years. She's been at this for a long time and worked in all different facets of the business world, both government, both non-governmental, as she had mentioned, as well, and also the non-for-profit. So she's really covers the gamut. So if you'd like some more information, go to turnaroundbook.com. Again, it's turnaroundbook.com. And depending on when you're listening to this, and hopefully you're listening to this at the right time, she's running a special where you can actually get the digital copy of the version for only 99 cents. Again, I hope you're listening to this at the right time. And if you're not, if you have to pay a little bit more, that's okay. It's worth it. Again, go to turnaroundbook.com. So, you mentioned non-obvious, right? And I think about, when a business, and I have friends that have turned around their businesses and they've done it on their own without bringing in a consultant. Could you maybe give us, some kind of key indicators of some things that, if they, for whatever reason, they're not going to bring in a consultant, of some things that a business, like, hey, you need to look at this, and this in order to turn your business around. And then another question, I didn't want to go on the negative route, but I think we probably should, because so many businesses are feeling now, is there a point of no return? Like, is there a point where it's not about turning the business around, it's more about winding it up? So I just figured I'd ask those two.
Yeah, well, to start with your first one, absolutely. There is a point where it isn't about turning it around. And hopefully you're figuring that out before it's too late. People have a hard time letting go. It doesn't matter, again, if they're in business, government, or philanthropy, it's their favorite thing. It's been around for a long time, but it no longer works. And so boards, I have been called the Princess of Darkness on one board where I finally said, this isn't working. It hasn't been working for a while. It becomes more painful every day. You people need to bite the bullet, and we just need to find a home for these assets so the assets can live, breathe, and produce after the entity is gone, but still achieving the good that you invested in, what you wanted to see have happen. So the answer for your latter question is absolutely. Look, when I talk a lot about auditing, and I think one thing we fail to do is we get so involved with the exciting things that we are engaged with, and we're all running down a path. It does help to, on a regular basis, do an audit of the activities in which the entity is engaged. And when I talk about the activities, I mean across the board. Look at your marketing and your communications. And that sometimes serves as a red flag. So, for example, I used to run a company in Silicon Valley for 15 years where we were brought in to solve a particular problem. Maybe they were going through a merger and acquisition, they were changing their brand identity, or they perhaps had a new product line and they wanted to develop an ingredient brand, like the Intel Inside program, which was my specialty. But when I got into the company and I tried to implement the new line of business, I kept running into boulders in the road. And the irony is my business, the core competency of why I started my business, ended up growing significantly because I would have to bring in SWAT teams to move the boulders. And so what you may discover, one company, I give an example of Apple Computer, where they had 100, if this was before the Apple stores, I'm old enough where I remember actually when they had channel marketing partners, they had 150 different contracts for the channel marketing partners because the sales guy was so incented to do the deal, and he was allowed to tweak the language. And all of a sudden, somebody on street number one had a slightly different deal than somebody on street number two. Well, that's just hard to manage. You can't manage it, from a corporate standpoint. Number two, you're actually spending a heck of a lot more money making all those changes in every single legal document. And three, how do you enforce the legal agreement if you got 150 different documents that just have slight modifications, which are actually significant? And so we worked with the folks at Apple. This was in the early 90s, and we culled it down to just basically 3 basic agreements. And that reduced their cost so significantly, it made their partners trust them far more. And it was a lot easier for them to manage when the company started making more changes into different categories of business and different categories of how they sold. So audit what you're doing and understand what are those compromises that you're making internally that are actually increasing the cost of your day-to-day business and making you less successful, and worst, making your customers not like you very much.
Yeah, again, just such great sound advice. When I'm listening to you tell a story, I remember when I believe, like when I was a kid, I think the only place you could get an Apple computer was like Radio Shack, right? I mean, they weren't, right?
And I was an adult then. That proves I'm much older than you are.
Well, right. And now the only place you can get it, well, not the only place, but it's I think it's Best Buy still, and then obviously, the Apple Store. Talk a little bit about also, and I think you were just kind of covering it. You hear this a lot too, the evolution of a business, and like when you think about, for instance, like American Express or Wells Fargo, like they were both originally companies that they're it's almost in their names, where they were just they were shipping gold and silver and currency for others, and then it became they do all these other things. Or even like General Electric, they're in all these different facets that can be good, that can be bad. But talk a little bit about kind of like the evolution of business and how sometimes things change. And I guess the kind of the real main question is that how can you tell, like, if it's the right thing? Because GE has gone down a bunch of different things, from insurance to financing and to all these different things, but some of them just totally don't work. How can you tell if it's the right move?
Well, how the question really is, I don't know how you tell if it's the right move. You're going to try things and you're going to fail. And that's what innovation is all about. And hopefully you're not failing at such a large degree that your investors are fleeing from you. You have to try different things, but you still need to remember what's your core competency. Look, my favorite example, because I love the company, it taught me so much, was Intel Corporation. Intel became a little unwindy. It lost its core objective, which was semiconductors. I find it fascinating right now that all of a sudden, because of the shortage of semiconductors, that Intel has brought back in someone that I worked with 30 years ago. It's going back to those basic principles that Andy Grove and Gordon Moore implemented, which is job one is owning the semiconductor market. These other businesses, they may make money, but are they your core competency? And that was something I learned from Craig Barrett, is that there was a situation where I developed a business plan to solve a government problem, a regulatory problem, and someone came in and sold my plan to the US government for $50 million. And I went back to Craig and I was so mad. It was, I was young and this was my big thing. And he goes, Lisa, my job is to sell semiconductors. If somebody makes 50 million, yeah, I could do that business, but it's not my job. And I think you have to go back again. Why was your company started? Now, some companies have evolved. I mean, Amazon sold books, right? But they evolve. They evolve based on their core competency. And so we do have a tendency to unwind. Some people try something interesting. Campbell made a decision during the health and wellness crave during Michelle Obama's time that they'd buy Bolt House. It didn't work. They all acknowledged that it didn't work. They all sort of shook hands and politely, at least in public. I don't know what happened in the background, but in public, they've all been pretty positive about the fact that they tried this fresh food market and this drink market that just didn't fit with Campbell. And so it had to go back. And, CPG companies do that a lot. Consumer product goods companies will buy things and then they'll get rid of them. It's a little harder in the high tech arena, but it happens.
Yeah, I think you're right too, and I think that's one of the hardest parts as an entrepreneur. And I talk with this a lot with my CFO and other people that work for me, and my ex-wife and my current wife about, we spend money on things that they don't work. Talk about the mental side of it if you can, because as a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, they're entrepreneurs. They want to at least get into the entrepreneurial world. And I think you really touched on something that's important, and major businesses do this all the time. Very rarely do you ever see them pivot to a point where it causes the business to collapse, but it does happen. But talk a little bit about, I look at, doing different things, because we're not a tech company, as like our R&D, like, all right, so this is a new market for us to market, to advertise in, and we're going to try it, and it doesn't work. But in reality, right, most businesses try things and they just don't work, right? I mean, it's just constant, I guess we'll call them.
Painful.
Yeah, it's very painful. That's it. I'm pained just trying to talk about it, Lisa, because it is painful.
I've recently gone through something about this, and I won't mention what the example was, but it was just so painful. People in the organization were unhappy, and everybody was articulating it in different ways. So some people within the organization thought their peers were being oppositional, and their peers didn't have enough knowledge in the category to articulate what made them uncomfortable. But they were just uncomfortable, and they kept using language and saying, well, it just doesn't work, or I just don't get it. And then all of a sudden, some of the investors were having the same comments. Well, why would you do it that way? I just don't get it. And the core group was working very hard to build something. They've been doing all the market research. They ultimately knew that the thing they wanted to create would be a market changer. And I had a conversation, which is, sometimes when it's so painful, maybe either it's just not the right fit with the organization, and we just have to go back to the core competency of the organization, or maybe you have to think creatively about how you're going to do that. Maybe it is a joint venture. Maybe it's a spin out, and you decide to invest in it, fund it, and grow it in a very different way. And perhaps it's why we have skunks projects, right? Like in high tech, we take something, we send a team of people off, we let them loose, they develop something, because they don't want to cause a distraction within the organization, because the thing that they're developing does require creativity. It requires a great deal of flexibility. Sometimes those things that get created come back into the primary company and they can be executed. And sometimes they're spinoffs. And I recognize with entrepreneurs, you don't have a lot of margin for error, which makes the pain points even more difficult. So the reality is, don't take comments personally. Look from the point of view from the person that's actually a professional, just like you are. Recognize that they may not be articulating the essence of what's wrong, but they're seeing something. Listen to them and be willing to sit down and go, okay, well, if something's causing a pain point, if we did it this way, would that work? If we did it that way, would it work? But also be willing to step away. There is a point where it just becomes so distracting. And I know I keep using this word distraction, but I cannot begin to tell you from every single entity that I've worked with, it's the distractions that'll kill you. It's pulling everybody's energy off on trying to do something that may indeed not be the right thing.
Yeah, but at the same time, you still have to try, right?
You got to try, but you got to listen. You've got to take away the emotional state. And it's one reason I do use process so much. And I interweave my process with diplomacy. That's a big part of my book, is executing with confidence, diplomacy, agility, and heart, because I do think you have to understand the impact to the people. But what process does is it allows you to take the emotion out of the situation, break the pieces down, put them into a fundamental decision-making path forward, and that will reveal to you where something is not working. And we're all emotional human beings. It's part of who we are. The critical thing is you have to listen to what people are saying. And even if they're the biggest jerk on the face of the earth and you don't like them very much, that doesn't mean they don't have a point.
You know what? I think that's a great place to end it. Again, I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank you for also being flexible. I'm doing this podcast right here from my car, and we had some technical difficulties, and we both had we had backups, and it was just kind of awesome that we made this happen. Again, folks, we've been on with Lisa Gable. She's the author of Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South. She's been at this for a very long time. She's worked with some of the biggest companies in the world. She's worked in some of the biggest companies in the world. She's also worked in government and also in nonprofit. So the thing is she really knows her stuff. She's the type of person that we have on the Alden Report. Real people who have done real things, who continue to do real things. And, again, you heard me, if you've been listening up until this point, you heard me say this a little bit earlier, somewhat of a selfish interest, because the title of her book is something that it draws emotion out of me, because I've been in business now for 13 years and my business is changing. And so I've had turnarounds as well. And I've had friends that have had turnarounds, and we've also had friends that just haven't been able to turn things around. I've had multiple businesses fail over and over and over again. And I look back and say, man, I wonder if I had taken some of the principles from Lisa's book, Turnaround, if I could have turned those businesses around. I guess I won't know. But here's the thing. If you pick up this book today, and keep it kind of in your toolkit, so to speak, I think a lot of the decisions that you might have trouble making, the answers are right in the book. So if you'd like some more information, go to turnaroundbook.com. And depending on when you're listening to this, and I'm hoping that you're listening to it at the right time, she's doing something pretty special for the launch of her book, where you can actually get a digital version of the book for only 99 cents. I like to get both. I like to have the digital version. So if I'm at the gym, I can just read it on my iPad or my iPhone, because those are what I use. But then I also like to have the physical copy as well, where I'm kind of marking it up and highlighting it. And I know you can kind of highlight stuff on the Kindle and also the iPad as well, but I kind of like to have both. So you know what, if the digital's at 99 cents and you get the physical copy, I would get both. You can just go to turnaroundbook.com. Lisa, thank you so much for spending the time and sharing your knowledge, not only here today on the Alden Report, but in this book. I truly believe that it's going to truly change the trajectory of not only businesses, but people's lives. So again, my name is Mike Alden, here from my vehicle. That's Lisa Gable that you're listening to, I'm pretty sure, at her home. It's been another edition of the Alden Report. And Lisa, thank you so much for being here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.